Want to call its next witness?
Yes, Your Honor, the Commonwealth calls Dr. Michelle Matthews to the stand.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you shall give to the court and the jury in the matter now pending shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
May I inquire, Your Honor?
Yes, so let me give an instruction first. So jurors, the Commonwealth intends to introduce into evidence through this Dr. Matthews certain photographs showing the alleged victim. And you'll have those photographs with you in connection with this witness's testimony and during your deliberations. Let me just say that the photographs are not pleasant. Indeed, they may be described as graphic. I instruct you that your verdict must not in any way be influenced by the fact that these photographs may be unpleasant or graphic. The defendant is entitled to a verdict based solely on the evidence and not one based on pity or sympathy for the deceased, which might be occasioned by the photographs. Consider these photographs only as they may draw attention to a clinical medical status or to the nature of the alleged victim's injuries or to the nature of the incident itself. Thank you. Okay.
Good morning.
Morning.
Could you please, and if I could ask that you just move the microphone, could you please state your name, spelling your last name for the record?
This is Dr. Michelle Matthews, M-A-T-T-H-E-W-S.
How are you employed?
I'm a medical examiner at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in Boston.
How long have you been working at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner?
5.5, almost 6 years now.
Where is the office located?
My office is located in Boston. You want the full address?
Sure.
720 Albany Street,
What is your present position at the office?
medical examiner,
How long have you been in that role?
for almost 5 years.
Are you a licensed physician?
Yes.
Prior to working at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, where were you employed?
I was a resident in California at Harbor UCLA Medical Center.
Can you describe for the jury your educational background?
Sure. I did undergrad at Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, and then I went to medical school at Howard University, College of Medicine in Washington, D.C., and then I did my residency at, again, Harbor UCLA Medical Center in Torrance, California, and then I did my fellowship at the Boston office of the Chief Medical Examiner's office, and then I stayed on as full staff after that.
Can you just explain to the juror what residency is?
Sure. For pathology, the residency is kind of a general training in pathology. So you get exposed to different branches underneath the umbrella of pathology, which include anatomic and clinical branches. So, and underneath those, including surgical specimen, doing diagnoses, cytology specimen, blood fluids, etc. And then for fellowship, it's a subspecialty training. So it's specialized for my specialty, it was for forensic pathology, which is the training to be a medical examiner.
And what does that entail?
That entails doing autopsies and determining cause and manner of death based on autopsy findings.
What is an autopsy?
An autopsy is an examination of the body used to determine cause and manner of death.
During your fellowship, did you observe autopsies?
Observe and perform mostly.
How many did you observe?
Well, for fellowship, the majority of my fellowship was doing autopsies, not observing autopsies.
Prior to doing your fellowship, had you had the opportunity to observe an autopsy?
Yes, we do autopsies in residency as well. They're just kind of a different format.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. For residency, we do what are called hospital autopsies. So they're generally autopsies on people who have natural deaths, whose families want a clearer picture of what happened maybe, or are just okay with the hospital doing it as training purposes for the residency program. And so that takes a little bit more of an in-depth look at maybe all of the organs microscopically. Whereas for fellowship, we are looking at a more broad picture of the cause and manner of death, so not necessarily a microscopic cause unless it's necessary. And for forensic autopsies, they're usually non-natural deaths that we are investigating, so things like car accidents or suicides, homicides, anything that's not a natural disease, or sometimes natural, but with other caveats along with it.
So you stated that you did your fellowship at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in Boston, is that right?
Yes.
And during that fellowship, you had the opportunity to conduct forensic autopsies?
Yes.
Approximately how many do you think that you conducted during your fellowship?
The requirement was at least 200. So I think by the time I finished my fellowship, I was closer to about 250.
Have you testified in court as to your findings during autopsies before?
Yes.
Approximately how many times?
Probably about 30 times at this point, give or take.
Can you describe the structure of the ME's office for the jury?
Like hierarchy-wise?
Please.
Okay. So at the top is our chief medical examiner. So she's kind of like big boss. And then underneath her, we have a deputy chief. And then under that are the medical examiners. And then under the medical examiners are, if we have fellows, would be the fellows.
1 second. Can you turn the phones off, please? Okay, go ahead.
Approximately how many medical examiners are within the office, if you know?
Within just Boston or within the state?
Within your office in Boston?
About 15.
Can you explain to the jurors what the process is by which you perform an autopsy?
Sure. It starts generally after we've been assigned the case by either our chief medical examiner or the deputy chief. For me personally, my process is that I will evaluate any information that I have on the case prior to starting. So sometimes, depending on when the case is reported to us, we're able to get medical records or police reports, et cetera. So those are reviewed. If there's any imaging that's done, that's reviewed. And then from there, an external examination of the body is done where we have documents where we can document anything that is an identifying factor, such as like scars, tattoos, hair color, eye color, et cetera. And then also anything that may be deemed as like an injury or something that is out of place. So that includes like medical therapy and any injuries that are seen or anything that may be an injury. And then if deemed necessary, then we do an internal exam where all of the organs are evaluated as well.
Do you do any lab testing or tissue sample testing?
Yes, generally for all cases, toxicology is taken, which is pulling of various body fluids sent to a toxicology lab for testing. And if necessary, we can do a microscopic evaluation on organs by collecting histology.
Can you just explain what histology is?
Sure. Histology is basically the examination of tissues under a microscope. So a piece of the organ is preserved in a paraffin wax and then is put onto a glass slide so that it can be evaluated by, again, through microscopy. And
Do you follow the process that you just described to us on all autopsies?
No, all autopsies do not require all of those steps, so it just depends on the case.
And you said that you would document certain things throughout your autopsy on the external examination and the internal examination. How do you document that?
We have image templates that have areas for us to document things on the body as well as making our own notes.
What about photographs?
And photographs are taken as well.
Turning your attention to May 17th of 2020, did you perform an autopsy on Kathleen McLean?
Can I open my notes?
Yes.
I have no objection, Your Honor. She looks at her notes.
So did you bring your report with you? And would it help you to be able to look at your report while testifying?
Yes.
And so turning your attention to May 17th of 2020, did you perform an autopsy on Kathleen McLean?
Yes.
Where was the autopsy conducted?
At the Boston office of the medical examiner.
Who was present?
I'm going to assume that there was probably police involved, but I'm not sure who all were there.
What branches of law enforcement, if you know?
I don't know for sure. Given, I would have to see given where we are currently, I would assume that it was probably Mass State Police for doing photos for their own self.
And is that normal for the law enforcement branches, whether it be the Massachusetts State Police or a town police department, to come and observe an autopsy?
Depending on the type of case, yes.
When they're there to observe, I believe you said that it would make sense that they would also take their own photographs, is that right?
Usually, yes. Depending on the case.
Did you follow the process that you just described during the autopsy on Kathleen McLean?
Yes, except I did not do histology.
Did you do a full external examination of Katie McLean's body?
Yes.
Can you describe the appearance of Katie's body when she was brought in to the medical examiner's office?
Yes, she had like dirt and debris, and she had on a pair of pants that had 2 large rocks within them, but then had no shirt on.
So you stated that she had dirt and debris.
Yes.
On what areas of her body?
The upper body where she didn't have any clothes.
And you stated that she had no shirt on, but pants with rocks in it, is that right?
Yes.
Was her body weighed with the rocks in her pants?
Yes.
How much did her body weigh with the rocks in her pants?
I'm not sure. I don't have that written down.
Would a copy of your full examination be helpful?
I don't believe so.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
If you could just take a look at the final diagnosis and report, if you could scan through that and let me know when you finish reading.
Yeah, it's not documented here. The pre-weight.
On the second page of the report under external examination,
Yes.
what does it say about the body of Katie McLean?
That she was 5'7" and 140 pounds.
Were the rocks removed from her pants prior to being weighed at 140 pounds?
Yes.
Your Honor, may actually, Ms. Gilman, could you please what's been placed on the screen, what's been pre-marked as Exhibit 301?
All right, we'll turn the lights down. I think some of the jurors were complaining about the glare, so we're going to try to, before we do this, try to close the shades here.
I think it's the one in the back. I think it's
So
the,
this building is almost,
think it's the one
maybe
in the
over
back.
200 years
Not
old.
that one. This one.
So we have to improvise as best we can.
Do those not go down anymore?
No. We have, do we have?
I think it's that one.
Okay, we'll put something in front of that one.
I don't think it's this one. I think it's one over there. Either that back corner. There you go.
All right, is that a little better, jurors? All right, thank you. I'm sorry, this is 301?
Yes. Dr. Matthews, is that a fair and accurate representation of the pants that Katie McLean was wearing when she was brought into the office of the chief medical examiner?
Yes.
And directly next to those black pants, are those the rocks that were placed within her pants?
Yes.
When you received her body?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach?
May.
I have no objection to any of the exhibits, Your Honor, so they're,
Okay. And these have not yet been marked, correct?
They have been. I am
They have, okay.
opening Exhibit 306.
All right, thank you.
And Dr. Matthews, is exhibit, what's depicted or what's in Exhibit 306 in the back, are these the black yoga pants that Katie McLean was wearing when she was brought into the office of the chief medical examiner?
Yes.
Thank you. And now looking at what's been pre-marked as Exhibit 307. Is this one of the rocks that was in Katie McLean's pants when she was brought into your office?
Yes.
And do you recognize this as the other rock that came out of the pants of Katie McLean?
Yes.
You stated that when Katie's body was brought in, she was covered in dirt and debris. Did you notice any other postmortem changes to her body?
Could you be more specific?
Did you notice any liver mortis to her body?
Oh, yes.
And what is liver mortis?
So liver mortis is the settling of blood in the skin after the small blood vessels relax post-death.
Did you notice any rigor mortis?
Yes.
And what is rigor mortis?
Rigor mortis is the tensing and then relaxing of muscles post-mortem after basically like the channels within the muscles release all their chemicals. So initially they're pretty strongly developed, and then over time it relaxes.
And where did you notice these changes to Katie McLean's body?
So her rigor mortis was mildly developed, meaning that her limbs were relatively easy to maneuver. And the liver mortis was mainly posterior, so on her back and then on her face.
Did you make any other observations of her face, her eyes in particular?
Her eyes had petechiae, which are basically like bursted blood vessels.
When you say it's bursted blood vessels, how does that occur?
It's usually due to an increase in pressure that causes the blood vessels to burst.
I'm sorry?
An increase in pressure of the head or face that causes the vessels to burst.
And what, if any, information does petechia to the eyes give you as far as forming an opinion as to cause of death?
On their own, not much, but mixed with other things, it can confirm, or I guess confirm's not a good word, but it is a sequelae of other things happening.
What do you mean by that?
Something, if there's like a strangulation or a hanging or something like that, that's usually one of the signs that you'll find as a part of the sequelae of the actions.
In this particular case, was the petechia evidence of any type of cause of death?
Yes.
What is that?
Along with other findings that there was potentially a strangulation that occurred.
What is strangulation?
It is pressure along the neck that cuts off the air and or blood pressure to the head.
And you say and or. What does that mean?
Depending on how the pressure is applied to the neck, it can cut off just the blood vessel flow or the airway flow or both.
And would just the blood flow cause death?
It can, yes.
Would just the airflow cause death?
Yes.
And both of them together would also cause death? Is
Yes.
that right?
Yes.
What is manual strangulation?
Again, it's the pressure along the neck by the hands of a person.
What do you look for as far as evidence of strangulation when you're doing an autopsy?
Externally, we are looking for any type of abrasions or marks along the neck that would match some level of pressure being applied to the neck. And then internally, we're looking for injuries to the subcutaneous tissues and the muscles underneath the area.
Aside from the petechia in Katie's eyes, what, if any, evidence of strangulation did you observe during your external examination of her body?
She had multiple areas along her neck that had ecchymoses, which are bruising, to both the right, middle, and left sides of her neck.
And you said ecchymosis is bruising?
Yes.
Ms. Gilman, could you please place what's been pre-marked as Exhibit 302 on the screen? Do you recognize this photograph?
Yes.
What do you recognize it to be?
So that is the middle of the front of her neck. And in the middle of that, you can see kind of a reddish pink ecchymosis at the top of the ruler.
And how do these injuries occur in strangulation?
By something putting pressure on the skin.
And what did you observe? You stated that you have made observations of the left side of her neck as well?
Yes.
And what are those observations?
Again, another ecchymosis.
Approximately how big was that ecchymosis?
4 centimeters in its largest dimension.
Thank you, Ms. Gilman. You can take the photograph down. Once you finish the external examination, what did you do?
I do an internal examination.
As part of the internal examination, did you look at the internal structures of Katie McLean's neck?
Yes.
Can you describe the internal structure of the neck in general?
Yes, so the neck has multiple layers of muscles that connect different parts of like the head to the chest. And they cover the thyroid. And along with the muscles, there's blood vessels and nerves, etc. And then there's also some cartilage and a hyoid bone that kind of connects the base of the tongue to the muscles of the neck.
And would a diagram help you explain the structures of the neck to the jury?
Sure.
Ms. Gilman, would you please place Exhibit 300 on the screen? May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
So I'm going to hand you this laser pointer.
Okay.
You just press this button in order to make it light up.
Okay. So,
In the diagram, if you could just explain the structures of the neck to the jury.
sure. Okay, so we'll start at the top. So here is your hyoid bone. It's kind of, so here you have muscles that are underneath the tongue. And you have a hyoid bone, and then these are your neck muscles. So it starts from externally, you have the sternocleidomastoid, which connects the base of the skull to the clavicle. Underneath that, you have a sternal hyoid bone, which connects your sternum to the hyoid. And then underneath that is which one are you? A sternothyroid, which connects your sternum to the thyroid cartilage. And then underneath those, you have your thyroid gland here, and then you have thyroid cartilage here. And then there's also this other muscle that runs underneath this called the omohyoid, which it's kind of two-faceted, where you have a portion that goes from the hyoid down, and then the other portion goes from this area to the side of the clavicle.
And how many layers of muscle do you have from your skin into the innermost internal structure of your neck?
Including the skin or not including the skin?
Including the skin.
4.
Ms. Gilman, you can please take the exhibit down. What, if any, internal injuries to Katie McLean's neck did you observe?
She had a bilateral muscle hemorrhage of the sternocleidomastoid muscles.
So I'm just going to stop you there. We're going to go step by step so that I understand what you're saying and that the jury understands as well.
Yes.
So first, when you're doing an autopsy, how do you get to the internal layers of the neck in order to look at them?
Okay. Try and do this in a way that's not, I don't know that I can make it any non-graphic. So basically the skin and subcutaneous tissues are reflected upward for the neck. So initially when we start the autopsy, there's a Y-incision that's made. So basically the top of the Y includes the neck and kind of the beginning of the chest. And so that portion of the skin and subcutaneous tissues, which are usually like fat, is reflected upwards to reveal the neck muscles.
And when you say reflected, you mean pulled up. Is that right?
Yeah, just dissected upward, yes.
And you stated that there was hemorrhages of the bilateral sternothoid muscle.
Sternocleidomastoid, yeah.
What does that mean?
So if you wanted to put that last picture back up, it might be a little bit more helpful to describe.
Please. Thank you.
So the sternocleidomastoid, so bilaterally, so each of these muscles is on both sides of your neck. So this muscle here is the sternocleidomastoid, so imagine that there's also one on this side. It's removed on this side so you can see the deeper muscles. So to say bilateral means that on both sides of the neck, there's hemorrhage within this muscle tissue.
And that would be on the right and left side of her neck, there were injuries?
Yes. And these are all anterior neck muscles.
What does that mean?
So there's anterior and posterior, so front and back. So these are all muscles of the front of the neck.
Did you observe any injuries on the front of her neck?
Yes, we're going through the front.
Okay, but I thought you said that there were also injuries to the left and right.
So front half of the neck, I guess, is a better way to say that. So anterior being everything in your anterior facing plane.
Okay.
So anterior right and left sides.
You stated earlier that there are approximately 4 layers of muscle, including the skin.
Yes.
On the neck. How many layers of injury did you see to Ms. McLean's neck?
So there's injury at each layer of the neck.
So all 4?
All 4 layers, including the skin, yeah.
And where on the neck?
Again, so bilaterally, so the sternocleidomastoids had hemorrhage, and then the underlying sternothyroid muscles also had hemorrhage, and then the sternohyoid muscles also had hemorrhage bilaterally.
So does that mean all the way around the neck?
It means for both sides of the front, and then there is also hemorrhage in the posterior side, but that's not shown in the picture.
And how are the injuries that you observed to the anterior area of Katie McLean's neck evidence of strangulation?
It just shows that there was a great amount of force put on her neck, on both sides of her neck.
What, if any, other injuries did you observe to the neck of Katie McLean?
Yes. There's also a fracture of her hyoid bone on the left side, I believe. Yeah, this is the left side for the photo. So the hyoid bone is kind of like a U-shaped bone that's kind of bone and cartilage. And then along the front, it's more solid. And then on the sides, they're kind of more cartilaginous, and then they kind of calcify as you get older, but they're a little more sensitive to pressure than the center of the bone. And so there was a fracture along the left side of her hyoid bone.
Ms. Gilman, could you please place Exhibit 299 on the screen? And Dr. Matthews, could you just explain what's on the screen right now?
Yes, so this is the hyoid bone without any of the muscles and things attached to it. So again, it's U-shaped. So for this case, like these areas here kind of start out as cartilage, and then they calcify as you get older, but as you can see, they're kind of thin bones, and so they are very susceptible to fracture if there's pressure applied to them. And so for this case, this side of the bone was fractured. And it was pre-mortem, we know, because there is also hemorrhage along with the fracture at that area.
And you stated earlier that the hyoid bone is between the larynx and the thyroid, is that right?
It's above the larynx.
Above, okay. Thank you for correcting me. Ms. Gilman, could you please place Exhibit 303 on the screen? And Dr. Matthews, could you please explain to us what we're looking at?
Yes, so this is the hyoid bone from Miss McLean. And so as you see, again, you have the U-shaped. Here is the left side of that hyoid bone. And while you can't necessarily discern the fracture, you can see that there's hemorrhage around this area of the bone, which shows that this fracture happened prior to her being dead.
And how does a hemorrhage tell you that it was pre-mortem?
Because once you're If it was postmortem, there wouldn't be blood there because there's no blood flowing.
Okay. And when you say premortem, you mean before death?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. And how is the fractured hyoid bone evidence of strangulation?
It just shows again that there was a level of a decent amount of pressure being put on the neck at that moment to cause the fracture.
Does a fracture of the hyoid bone always cause death?
No.
Why not?
Again, it's not really a critical structure in the body, and it's not a large enough bone that the fracture could cause like enough of a hemorrhage that could cause you to bleed out. So on its own, it would not be enough to cause death.
So it's just one other factor in determining cause of death being strangulation, is that right?
Yes.
How many autopsies have you performed or been involved in where the cause of death was determined to be strangulation, if you know?
I'm not sure, probably about 5 to 10. It's not usually common.
Broken hyoid bones.
I don't remember.
And would there always be a broken hyoid bone during a strangulation?
No.
Why not?
It just depends on the position of whatever is putting pressure on the neck. If the pressure is lower down, then you're not compromising the hyoid bone with the amount of pressure on the neck. So it's just a matter of placement of whatever is being used to cause the strangulation.
What other injuries did you observe to the internal structure of Katie McLean's neck?
She had posterior neck muscle hemorrhage as well.
And what does posterior mean?
So posterior is the back of the neck. So again, if your body is cut into two different planes down the center this way, you have anterior, then you have posterior. So the posterior neck is the back of the neck, so along the spinal cord and all that.
So where in the neck muscles was the hemorrhage that you talked about?
Alongside the spinal column.
How many layers in?
I believe 2 or 3. I would have to see the photo again.
Ms. Gilman, could you please place exhibit 305 on the screen? Oh, I'm sorry, I believe that is...
That's anterior.
Yeah. So we will go back to that. Could you please place exhibit 304 on the screen? Could you just explain to the jury what you're seeing here?
Yes. So this is the skin and subcutaneous tissues removed from the back of the neck. And along the spinal column, you can see that there are pockets of hemorrhage along the muscles in here.
And what does those injuries or that pooling of blood tell you about when those injuries occurred?
Again, they would be pre-mortem or peri-mortem because of the hemorrhage. And it suggests that there was something that went all the way around the neck to cause injuries to both the front and the back.
How do you know that?
Because there's injuries to the front and the back. So if there was only pressure along the front of the neck, you wouldn't expect to see injuries in the back of the neck.
And going back to the injuries that you observed in the front of Katie's neck, how deep were those, did you say?
Through all 4 layers.
Through all 4 layers. And Ms. Gilman, could you please take exhibit 305 back on the screen? And could you please explain to the jury what we're seeing in this photograph?
Yes, so this is the anterior neck with the muscles reflected. And so this is the sternothyroid muscles covering the thyroid gland. This is kind of the top of the larynx here. And then you have the sternocleidoid, omohyoid, and sternohyoid muscles reflected to show the area.
So is that the last layer of muscle before getting to bone?
Yes.
And those deep bruises in there, is that the hemorrhaging that you're talking about?
Yes, so this here on both sides would be the deep bruising.
And what does that deep bruising tell you about when those injuries occurred?
Again, this was probably pre or peri-mortem, so contributing to the death.
When you say peri-mortem, what do you mean?
Around the time of death, as in like she may not have been completely dead or dying.
Are you done with that photo, Ms.
I
McLean?
am, so take that down, I apologize, Your Honor. Ms. Gilman, could you please place exhibit 297 on the screen? And could you just explain for the jurors what this diagram is?
Sure. So again, this is the posterior neck. And so again, you have a superficial layer here. So this is your trapezius muscle. And then you have the deeper layers here. This one being, which one are you? Splenius and semisplenis, semispinalis, excuse me, muscles. So these are the three layers of the posterior muscles.
And on this diagram, could you show us where those injuries that you observed on Katie McLean's body would have been?
Yeah, so they would have been kind of in the midline here along these semispinalis muscles, so kind of deeper in than just the superficial layer.
You may take that exhibit now, please, Ms. You described strangulation earlier as oxygen or blood being cut off to the brain, is that right?
Yes.
Can you describe what areas of the neck would have to be cut off in order to prohibit oxygen to the brain? Would it be helpful to put the diagram back up?
Sure.
If you could please put the front neck diagram back up.
Yeah.
Ms. Gilman, thank you very much. And what exhibit number is that? Exhibit number? Thank you.
Okay. So to prevent blood flow, compression of your internal and external jugular veins and or your carotid arteries, which are kind of out here. The carotids are a little bit deeper into the muscles, would need to be compressed. And then in the center here is your airway. So that could also be compressed.
And how does strangulation cause death?
Again, it's a cutoff of oxygenated blood flow to the head that causes the brain to basically shut down, which in turn will cause the rest of your body to shut down.
And how long does it take for a body to shut down without oxygen or blood flow?
I'm not sure.
What happens to the brain when it's without oxygen?
The brain will start to swell,
And then what happens?
and then it can, depending on how long it takes, it can herniate downward, which means, so within the skull, there are openings that allow for like your spinal cord and blood vessels to pass through. If the brain swells too much, it can herniate into that opening, which will compress other parts of the brain, which will cause you to no longer be able to control your breathing or your heart rate or anything like that, which is how your body stops functioning.
Does every strangulation lead to death?
Probably not.
Why not?
Because if there is a chance, I guess, that one can survive being strangled.
And would CPR help revive a person that had been strangled?
Potentially, yes.
And that would increase the blood flow and the oxygen flow back to the body, is that right?
Yes.
What needs to happen in order to cause death in a strangulation? It's complete loss of blood flow and airflow?
Or enough to cause enough of a depletion of oxygenated blood. So either no oxygen coming in because you can't breathe, or the the oxygen exchange not occurring because the blood vessels are compressed, or a combination of the two.
Would the bilateral injuries that you observed inside of Katie's neck be consistent with only a one-handed strangulation?
Probably not, unless the hand was.
Okay, sustained. Rephrase it, please.
What are the bilateral injuries to Katie's neck consistent with?
With there being pressure on both sides of her neck.
And you stated that there was also injuries to the back of her neck?
Yes.
And what is that consistent with?
That there's anterior and posterior injury to the neck, as in something was large enough to cause injury to both sides of the neck.
So to be all the way around her neck?
Yes.
What, if any, injuries did you observe on the internal head exam of Katie?
She had subgaleal hemorrhage and subarachnoid hemorrhage. So subgaleal hemorrhage is kind of, it's hemorrhage like on the top of the skull cap. And then subarachnoid hemorrhage is on top of the brain tissue itself. And there's also temporalis muscle hemorrhage, which are muscles that are on the outside of the skull cap.
What does that mean?
The temporalis muscle hemorrhage means that there was something that caused injury to both sides of her head.
Ms. Gilman, could you please place Exhibit 298 on the screen? Could you please describe for the jurors what we're looking at?
Sure. So this is a very rough detail of the layers of the head. So you have skin, bone, and then layers of dura mater, which is kind of a very strong fibrous covering of the brain, and then arachnoid matter, which is underneath that, where your blood vessels are, and then pia matter is kind of in between, underneath here, where your cerebrospinal fluid accumulates.
And where did you observe injury to Katie McLean's head?
So the subgaleal hemorrhage would be underneath the skin and above the skull, so along kind of this passageway.
Okay.
And then the subarachnoid hemorrhage would be in this area, basically showing that there was injury that caused the blood vessels to bleed.
And the injuries that you observed on Katie's head, what did they tell you about timing of those injuries?
That they were also probably perimortem because there is hemorrhage there. So there was still some level.
That means before that.
Yes.
Where on Katie, I know you showed us the layers, but I believe you said something about bilateral injuries. Can you just explain that a little bit more?
Yes. So, so again, your head has a right and left side. So she had temporalis muscle hemorrhage. So the temporalis muscles are kind of these thin muscles that are on the sides of your skull. And they cover some of the blood vessels that go into the skull cap. And then there was also bilateral subarachnoid hemorrhage. So your brain has a right and left side as well. So there was hemorrhage on both sides of the brain.
And what are the injuries in her head that you observed evidence of?
That there was some level of blunt force injury to the head.
What other parts of her body did you examine on the internal examination?
All of the internal organs are evaluated.
What, if anything, did you observe regarding her respiratory system?
She had pulmonary congestion and edema, as well as pleural effusions, which are accumulations of fluid along the lungs.
What is that evidence of?
That there was an increase in fluid either through inhalation or some process caused there to be excess fluid within her chest cavity.
And the amount of fluid, what would that tell you about the timing of when that was taken in?
It wouldn't. That's not predictable.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the amount of fluid is not really a prediction of timing. It's just that it's there.
And how much fluid is that?
There was 120 milliliters on each side. So about 1/10 of a liter.
So would that be indicative of the body being placed in water?
Yes, it can be.
And as far as timing, would that show that it was either pre-mortem or post-mortem?
I couldn't make that prediction.
Okay. And what else did you observe in the respiratory system or in the internal examination of Katie?
Again, that her lungs were congested and had edema, which is a buildup of fluid within the lung tissue itself.
What does that mean?
Again, so there was a buildup of fluid. So again, with the pleural effusion, it kind of plays hand in hand that there was an excess of fluid within her lung tissues.
What, if any, effect would being submerged in water have on a body?
Can you be more
Or
specific?
how would it affect an autopsy if a body had been submerged in water prior to you performing your autopsy?
Depends on how, kind of depends on how long they've been there, to be honest. If they haven't been in the water long, then there's not much effect on the body. If they've been there for a while, it can cause an increase in the timing of decomposition of the body.
And was Ms. McLean's body decomposed at all?
Yeah.
What evidence did you collect from Katie McLean's examination?
For evidence, so in case like this, the standard is to do head hair, pubic hair if available, and then right and left nail clippings, as well as blood.
And did you collect the fingernails of Katie McLean?
Yes.
What did you do with them once they were collected?
I packaged them into small manila envelopes, and then through a chain of custody, they are given to the police department for them to process however they do.
And you stated that you also generally take blood, is that right?
Yes.
And I believe you testified earlier that you take blood for toxicology.
Yes.
Was blood taken from the body of Katie McLean?
Yes.
Was it sent for toxicology?
Yes.
What were the results of the toxicology?
Her blood was positive for ethanol, which is like drinking alcohol, and caffeine, so coffee.
What level of alcohol?
A 0.098.
What does that level tell you?
That she had some level of alcohol in her system.
How
That
does
she.
that level affect someone?
It depends on the person and their.
If you could just wait 1 moment while the siren stops, thank you.
Okay. It depends on the person and the level of their habit of drinking. So our, I guess, federal level, legal level for intoxication, I believe, is a 0.08. But if a person has a regular drinking habit, then they tend to build a tolerance to alcohol. And so a higher level may not equal to them being intoxicated versus a person who doesn't drink often.
After conducting all of your examination, were you able to form an opinion as to the cause of death of Katie McLean?
Yes.
And what was your opinion as to cause of death?
Strangulation.
What information caused you to conclude that Katie's cause of death was strangulation?
The culmination of the injuries of the anterior and posterior neck, along with the hemorrhages of the eye.
What is a death certificate?
It's a legal document that declares the cause and manner of death.
Did you sign a death certificate for Katie McLean?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
I'm showing you what's been pre-marked as Exhibit 281. Do you recognize it?
Sure. This is for this township's death certificates, yes.
And is that the death certificate that you signed off on for Katie McLean?
Yes, I do mine digitally, and then they're propagated depending on the county.
Thank you. If I could just have one moment, Your Honor.
May.
And I'm sorry, you stated that you determined the cause of death for Katie McLean to be strangulation, is that right?
Yes.
And is that to a degree of medical certainty based on your training and experience?
Yes.
Okay. And you also have an opinion based on a degree of medical certainty on whether Katie McLean was deceased prior to being placed in the water?
No.
And you stated that you had taken the fingernail clippings of Katie McLean and you sent those to the state police, is that right?
I believe so. I'm not sure which department actually took them, but I'm assuming state police.
And what about the blood that you took? Was that sent to the DNA
I'm
lab?
sorry, I apologize. I object to the I'm assuming it's state police. This is called chain of custody.
Okay, sustained. Rephrase that last question, please.
So are you aware that the state police was involved in this investigation?
Yes.
And when you take samples or fingernail clippings, blood from during an autopsy, do those things get sent to the state police crime lab for testing?
It follows a chain of custody, and I'm not involved in the chain of custody once I sign off on my portion of it. So I can't say for certain that they went to the state police.
Okay. Would it be usual for blood and fingernail clippings to be sent to the state crime lab for testing after you have taken them?
If they requested it, yes.
Could I have one moment,
You
please,
may.
Your Honor? I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you.
Jesus Christ, he's got spits. Good morning. I'm okay. How are you?
So Dr. Matthews, you've been at this particular office of the medical examiner for 6 years, is that right?
Almost, yes.
And you also have not you personally, but the chief medical examiner's office, you also have an office in Pocasset, is that right? Or used to?
There's an office in Sandwich, and there's an office in Westfield.
Okay, so down in Cape and Westfield.
Yeah.
Now, you get what's called a history or information from the investigators, the police, before you actually perform an autopsy, or how does that actually work? In other words, do you get reports, do you get information, or do you just have your body and then you do the autopsy?
In an ideal situation, we have police reports and information before we start. I don't remember which order things came in. When a decedent is reported to our office, whomever does that reporting calls into our office and they give a synopsis of the situation. So sometimes that synopsis is all we have to go on until later on in the investigation. And then prior to the case being signed out, ideally, again, we have police reports or emergency records and medical records, et cetera, to review.
Okay. So before you actually performed the autopsy, and you perform a number of autopsies a day, is that right?
Yes.
Obviously, it fluctuates.
Right. Depends on the day, yeah.
When you perform the autopsy and you have the information, for example, in this particular case, the autopsy was actually performed by you, was it on the 16th of May?
No, it was done on the 17th.
17th of May, 2020. And you determined that, in fact, this was an individual that was involved in a struggle in a home in Dover, Massachusetts, right?
I would need to look at the, yes,
All right. And you learned that there was allegedly a struggle that resulted in a application of significant force to the neck of this individual, Kathleen McLean, correct?
yes,
And did you learn that her body had been removed from the house and had been placed somewhere?
removed and placed in the pond, yes,
Yes. And when it was placed in the pond, it had the two rocks that you had identified as being in the leggings, I believe, right?
yes.
And when was the body placed in the pond?
I don't know.
How long was the body in the pond?
Again, I don't know.
Was the body found in the pond face up or face down?
I don't recall. I would need to review scene photos for that.
Okay. Is it your testimony that you saw scene photos in this case?
I would believe so, but again, I can't say for certain that I have seen photos, so I'm not sure how she was found.
Would it be important to you as a pathologist as to whether or not the body was actually located in the water face down or face up?
For this case, I don't think it would make much difference.
Okay. In your examination, one of the things you noticed were ecchymoses of the anterior neck bilateral. That would be anterior is front, right?
Yes,
And so the ecchymosis would be what? Is that a bruising?
yes,
Were there fingerprint pattern bruises?
it can, yes.
They can be, but how about in this case? Were there any
Were there actual fingerprint bruising?
fingerprint pattern bruising? That you say that, in other words, would you agree with me that fingerprint pattern bruising is something that is somewhat common in strangulation cases?
It can be.
And did you find any fingerprint patterns?
Our heating system, she's, that's our heating system, apologize for the noise.
I was like, it's so much. I cannot say for certain that there was fingerprint patterning on her neck.
And the ecchymosis of the anterior neck bilateral, that began that would be bruising, correct?
Yes,
Front of the neck, correct?
yes,
And then there's sternocleidomastoid muscle hemorrhage bilateral, right?
yes,
And that would be one of the strap muscles or a long, thin muscle that goes in the area of the neck on the left side, right?
yeah, on the both sides, yes,
Both sides, okay? And then sternohyoid muscle hemorrhage bilateral, that would be another long, thin strap muscle that actually kind of presses and pulls the hyoid bone, goes in the screen in place, right?
yes,
And then you have on the hyoid bone, you've got what you noted in what would be described as the horns. You have the greater horn, great horns, there are two of them, and then you have what they call the lesser horns, right?
correct,
And I think you said something that as you get older or whatever, they calcify. In other words, they're not cartilagey, they might be a little stiff.
correct,
And that might possibly be indicative of a person that has been subjected to significant application of force to the neck if you have what's referred to as a hyoid fracture, right?
yes,
Now, the hyoid fracture, in this case, you noted was on the greater horn, that in fact it was on the left of the greater horn, meaning the larger process, if you will, that sticks out of that bone.
yes,
And that would tell you that, in fact, the greater horn being on the left-hand side of the neck was where there was a significant application of pressure that caused the cracking of the hyoid bone, right?
yes,
You have S-C-L-E-R-A-L, is that scleral?
Scleral, yes.
Scleral hemorrhage, bilateral. Now, when you say scleral hemorrhage, that's not petechiae, right?
They are petechiae.
Oh, okay. So you're using the term scleral hemorrhage interchangeable with petechiae, is that correct?
Petechiae are a type of hemorrhage.
All right, so scleral hemorrhaging actually would be the small blood vessels that they break, and that they're basically broken blood vessels.
Correct.
You're familiar with the book of Medical Legal Investigation of Death, 4th edition, Werner Spitz. Used to be old Spitz and Fisher, but now it's Werner Spitz. You're familiar with that, correct?
I'm familiar with its existence.
That's kind of like the Bible for pathology, right?
For forensics, yes.
Yeah, and you've certainly heard of Werner Spitz, and you've certainly heard of Dr. Fisher, right?
Sure, yes.
I mean, they're kind of like legendary in the pathology field, if you will, right?
Sure, I guess.
Okay, so you'd agree with me that and you're familiar with this book, and they use it in medical schools and everything, right?
Not in medical school, no.
Not medical school?
No, that's a forensic pathology book, so that would be specific to forensic. Very well after, yes.
You probably have it in the library.
I do have it.
Now, would you agree with me that the scleral hemorrhage is the break in the conjunctivae? What's the conjunctivae? What is that?
So the conjunctiva is the inside of your eyelids. So kind of like if you were to pull your eyelid down, and that like kind of light pink fleshy area is your conjunctiva, and the sclera is like the white part of your eyeball.
All right. And the scleral hemorrhage would be the broken blood vessel that would be noted in the sclera, I guess.
Correct.
That would be like a little red dot.
They can be small red dots, or they can be slightly larger. Depends on how many of the vessels have broken.
Now, you also made reference to, I believe, the conjunctival hemorrhage, and you'd agree with me that that would be a vessel break that's in the white of the eye, correct?
The conjunctiva is the inside of the eyelid.
Okay. Now, when you made observation of the scleral hemorrhage or the conjunctival hemorrhage in the eye, were they in both eyes or one eye?
Both.
And when you were doing the autopsy, what do? You actually pull the eyelid down and look to see?
Yes.
And do you make note of how many, for example, how many of these little pinprick hemorrhages are noted?
No.
You recall that there were not a lot in this case, right?
I don't recall.
Did you take photographs of it?
I would assume so, but I don't know for a fact. I would have to look through the photos to confirm.
Now, can you tell me, the district attorney had asked you about the process that is used when you actually do the autopsy. I know I read a lot of times it's called the usual Y-shaped incision or something like that. Does that mean anything?
The Y-shaped incision, yeah, that's how we open the body to get to the internal organs.
In other words, you kind of start at the navel, you go up, and then you make the split, and then left, and then the right.
Well, me personally, I start at the shoulders and come in and then go down, but
So it looks like a Y.
yes.
And then, of course, that allows you access to the internal organs that you have to examine, correct?
Yes, and then the neck as well.
And then the neck. Okay. Can you tell me the order of examination that you perform? In other words, do you do the Y-shaped incision first, or do you excise the neck first, or how is it you do that?
For me, I do the Y-incision first to expose the internal organs, and then the rib cage is removed to expose the lungs and heart, and then for me, I take out each organ individually. So I will take out heart after collecting my toxicology samples, I'll take out heart and lung, and then take out the organs of the abdomen. Intestines, kidneys, et cetera, et cetera. And then once those are removed, I will dissect the neck.
Now, is the head and the body level on the table, or is it elevated, or do you utilize any particular objects? Elevating the head is not.
The table itself is slightly elevated so that there's an end of the table that is a drain that drains into a sink for obvious reasons. And then the body is usually on what we call a block, so it elevates kind of the chest area a little bit more just to make it easier for access to all of the parts of the body without having to bend over a lot. And then the head has its own block for when the skull is opened.
Okay. Now, one of the things that I think you made reference to in your report is, by the way, so in other words, you did in fact elevate the head by way of a block, removing the other objects that you had to examine, and then you examined the neck musculature. Is that right?
Yes, the head is elevated to remove the brain.
Now, you indicated, I think, in response to one of the DA's questions about decomposition, and decomposition basically would be the breakdown of tissues and things of that nature, correct?
Yes.
Now, was there any, you indicated there was no indication, no evidence of decomposition in this case, right?
Correct.
You did make reference to the fact in your report that there was sphenoid, S-P-H-E-N-O-I-D, sinus fluid collection, right?
Yes.
And what is sphenoid sinus fluid collection?
So the sphenoid sinus is an area in the skull kind of above the nose and kind of,
Sinuses.
sinuses within this area. And so that area is checked when there's a question of drowning to see if there's fluid within that sinus.
And there was some fluid in there, correct?
Yes. There was a small amount of fluid.
It would mean that that type of fluid is very common and may be discharged in the course of the pressure to the neck, is that right?
No, it's probably not because of the pressure of the neck.
Right, but it's common in circumstances such as this autopsy that you were performing, right?
It's common in bodies that are found in water, yes.
Same thing with the frothy, I think was the expression you used, frothy fluid that was in the lung, right?
Yes.
That would be the plural effusion?
The frothy fluid would be the edema within the lung tissue. The effusion is just on the outside, is in the cavity that the lungs sit in.
Now, one of the things that you would look for in a cause of death where there's a struggle and there's strangulation effort by the hands on the throat of another person or a hand on their throat, there's a defensive reaction by the person who's having the reaction choked off, right?
I would assume so, yes.
Well, you don't just assume it, it's a matter, I mean, it's very common that there would be claw marks on the person's hand as the person would struggle, right?
On the assailant's hands, yes.
Yes, and in fact, there were no claw marks or bruises or injuries or anything on his hands whatsoever.
That's not a part of my investigation.
One of the things that you had mentioned is that you take the sample of the blood, right?
Yes,
You don't just take one sample, I mean, you take iliac vein sample, right?
yes.
What is that?
So iliac veins are vessels that are in the leg or that run from the abdomen into the legs. And so as a standard toxicology collection is that we have two different samples of blood. So usually heart blood and iliac
Okay.
or femoral.
You mentioned the heart blood, right? There's also, I believe it's vitreous fluid.
Yes.
What is vitreous fluid?
Vitreous fluid is the fluid that is inside of the eyeball.
So you guys took a sample from the iliac, the heart, also urine, right?
Yes.
And vitreous fluid from the eyeball, correct?
Yes.
And that was with an effort to try to determine on a toxicology test whether or not there are any indicia of alcohol or drugs or anything like that in the system, right?
Yes, those are standard samples taken on all autopsies.
So in this case, you there was a, says 0.12 ethanol. What does that mean?
That is the percentage of ethanol in the vitreous humor.
Okay. Now, the vitreous humor, again, is the fluid that's in the eyeball, right?
Yes.
And that's a very accurate source, if you will, almost like deep heart blood. Vitreous humor from the eyeball is a very accurate source of blood for purposes of ethanol or narcotic testing, right?
Yes, it can be it's not blood, but it's kind of a filtration of the blood.
Exactly, it's the fluid.
Right.
That's a pretty good source of fluid for examination as to the level of alcohol that would be in a person's system, right?
Yes.
When a person dies, does the body continue to metabolize the alcohol, or does it just stop at that level, or what is that?
To metabolize alcohol, it does not usually. Your body functions do not continue once you're.
Even though you're dead, the body would still, alcohol that's in the body would still be dissipating or disappearing, if you will, correct?
It might still be accumulating. Your body tends.
The ingestion, it depends on the time of the ingestion, right?
And also depends. There are other factors within your body that may produce alcohol once you're dead. So, like if.
I'm asking a bad question. I'm not asking, I understand that putrefaction and things
Right.
of that nature, if the body is out in the field for 5 days, it might create its own alcohol. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when somebody's drinking, as you said, you know, the regular stuff that we drink, the alcohol. Does that dissipate or metabolize when a body is, the person is dead?
I would say no.
So, when you examine the vitreous humor, you get a determination from the toxicology screen that it's a 0.12 alcohol. What does that tell you for alcohol level?
That it was around that area, around that amount.
So 1.2, I mean, you told the jurors that it's your understanding that the federal standard of being under the influence is a 0.08, which is also in Massachusetts. You're aware of that, right?
Yes.
So that would be about 4 points over the limit, if you will, on the blood alcohol, right?
Yes.
For 1.2. What's the gabapentin? You know,
What is gabapentin?
what's gabapentin? Was there gabapentin found in the blood examination of Ms. McLean?
Not that I have.
Can you look at analysis, summary, and reporting limits, Office of Chief Medical Examiner, NMS, looks like page 18.0. Let me do it this way. Let me just approach you. Recognize this as being part of the attachments to your report?
Yes.
Okay. You have it?
Oh, okay.
All right. So it does indicate that there would be testing for barbiturates and various narcotics as well as alcohol, correct?
Yes, those are what would have been tested for.
All right. And there was an indication that there was gabapentin in the blood, correct?
No.
Okay. Was there an indication of any barbiturates whatsoever?
No. So what you're looking at are just what the test will test for, not the actual findings.
That was tested for.
So the positive findings area or the detailed findings area explain that there's only ethanol and caffeine that was identified in her blood system. Underneath where you were looking is just showing all the testing that was done on the blood.
Now, the alcohol testing itself as well was also taken from whole blood in the deep part, correct?
Let me see which one they sent.
You removed the fluids yourself.
Yes.
Was the autopsy, right?
Yes.
When you were looking at the hands of Ms. McLean, did you make any observations of any cuts or defensive wounds in and about the hands themselves?
Of her hands, no.
the area of the lower portion of the face?
No.
A minute, Ron, please.
Yes.
And finally, doctor, again, it's your understanding, as a medical examiner on this case, that you have no idea whatsoever how long Ms. McLean's body was in the pond, correct?
Correct.
You have no idea whether or not it was face down in the pond or face up in the pond, correct?
Correct.
And if the body is face down, whether it's suspended in some fashion, if it's floating, like the float that you might do in a pool or something, or if it's laying down on the ground, there would be a pooling of the blood. Isn't that right?
Yes.
The pooling of the blood is what causes that lividity that you were testifying to, correct?
Yes.
Because of gravity, the blood settles down to the bottom portion of the body itself, right?
Yes.
If the body is face down in the water, then in fact, the pooling of the blood would take place in the area of the nose, of the face, and of course in the chest, right?
Yes.
Ms. McLaughlin, anything else?
Just have one moment, please.
Yes.
You were just asked on cross-examination about lividity.
Yes.
Can you explain what that is?
Again, it's the pooling of blood from the skin, from the small vessels in the skin.
Is that the same thing as bruising?
No.
How is it different?
So again, lividity is basically just once the blood vessels relax and start to be leaky, the blood will settle into whatever skin is by gravity the lowest. Bruising is specific to there being some level of irritation and pressure on a certain area.
So the ecchymosis that you described earlier when we looked at the pictures around Katie's neck, that is not from lividity, right?
Correct.
Okay. And you talked a little bit about the samples that you took from Katie and specifically the blood samples and the tissue samples that you took from her?
Yes.
If I could just show you two photographs.
No, I didn't do this too.
Do you recognize, I know they're small, but do you recognize those two photographs?
Yes.
Are those blood samples that you took from the body of Katie McLean?
Yes.
And are those a known standard for blood testing?
That was for evidence, so that would have been a part of what would go to the police if they requested it.
So those were taken to the state police crime lab for testing?
Right.
No further questions?
I have nothing further, thank you.
Okay, thank you, doctor. You may step down.
Thank you.